Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live right here from under a full moon in a very waterlogged southeastern Louisiana. Glad to have you folks joining in tonight. Sorry we missed out on streaming last week, had those little storms to deal with. Yeah, but they're out of our hair for the moment. At least, yeah, for now. I see there's a couple more lined up, but it's all good. That's not tonight, right? So, big shout out to all you guys there on Facebook that are watching the stream live, as well as everybody listening in on the Edge Radio US and iHeartRadio. Glad to have you folks joining in. If you want to see a picture to go along with your broadcast, join us at Facebook at Southern Horror Queen. Hey Stacy, hey Freddie, glad to see you guys joining in this evening. It's going to be a hell of a show. I hope those folks out there in radio world are prepared for it. Good evening, Aunt Wanda, beautifully representing Pearl River County, Mississippi. Glad to have you as always. Give Uncle D a big hug for me. Before we get rolling this evening, as always, got to give those shout outs to my sponsors. I've got some fantastic sponsors. Visit www.authorlyngibson.com and you can check out all of their links there with the discount codes. That's right, we hook you up with some serious discount codes here at the Twisted Southern Horror Queen stream. First up, if you are an avid vapor, check out my friends at Big Time Vapes in Picayune, Mississippi. You can find them here on Facebook or at 711 Memorial Boulevard. If you are trying to kick the habit, they've got the mods and equipment and juice you need to do that and be successful. Trust me, I did it. Never thought I would, but I did it. I kicked the habit and have been cigarette free for 7 years. In 2 months, it will be 7 years. I went from 2 packs a day to none with the correct mod, correct juice, and all that good stuff. Yep, that's right. They can hook you up, and you can be successful in dropping that nasty little habit. Also, our friends at Coffee Shop of Horrors, you can check them out at Facebook as well. 54 and counting. Incredible blends of coffee, whole bean ground for your Keurig, whatever the case may be. You will not believe some of the flavors they've got lined up. And use code EDGE2020 when you go to checkout, and you get 10% off your entire order. Also, our newest sponsor, Hawaiian Island Shine. Yes, this is the stuff I use on Jezebel. I praise this stuff. It's incredible. This right here is the Diamond Shine. If there are any 2 products that you're going to buy from Hawaiian Island Shine, make sure Wash and Wax is the first one. Diamond Shine's the second one. This stuff goes on easy, it comes off fast, and it lasts for a really long time. Get stuck out there on the interstate behind a semi and get all that road muck all over your vehicle. Come home, spray it off, wipe it down, and you are good to go again. No more 3-hour detail days, I promise you. Incredible products for the inside and outside of your car. Metal polish, leather polish, you name it, we got it. Go to authorlyngibson.com and go to Hawaiian Island Shines tab. Click on there, go shopping for a little while, pick up everything you need for your vehicle, and get 10% off when you check out using code EDGE2020. Hi, you like how I do that, huh? Teresa, good to see you, sweetheart. Steve, always awesome to have you in the house. Antonio, good evening, my sweetheart. Glad to see you joining in. Let's see if it's going to scroll. Miss Holly Parks is in the house as well. Good to see you, Holly. We are doing better, Holly. Yes, Teresa, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for asking. If we can just get these hurricane season behind us, it's going to be all good. Wild Bill, my boy, is in the house. Thank you so much for joining in. Freddie's already got the link up there to one of my favorite sponsors. That's right, Naked Wines. They promote some fantastic mom and pop vineries all over the world, not just here in the States. They really can't afford these multi-million-dollar campaign ads to get their products on Walmart shelves. So, you want some really good wines? Check out Naked Wines. I got $100 vouchers. If you want $100 off your first order, I can hook you up with that. And last but certainly not least, our guys over at Rot Inc. I do have a couple of the t-shirts here on the side, but you've seen those. They do the Louisiana Legend t-shirts, and hopefully tonight somebody from Rot Inc. might be listening because they asked about one of these creepy critters that we're going to talk about tonight. Maybe there will be a new t-shirt in the works. I think that would be awesome. So cross your fingers, folks, and we'll see if they bite on that. I don't think I've forgotten anybody as far as the sponsors go. If I have, I'm so sorry. It's hard taking a week off. You get rusty, and my brain cells are lacking. I was a teenager in the 80s, and I had a lot of fun. Don't say anything, Glenn Harrison. I know you want to. All right, so Stephen Bev Martin, glad to have you joining in this evening, folks. This is going to be a wild ride. Everybody always likes the urban legends, and I got a couple really good ones here. Some of them you may have heard me talk about before. Hey, Janice, nice to see you, sweetheart. But there's so many new folks joining my page and listening to the streams every week, and they get shared on so many different other paranormal groups pages that you never know when you got a new listener. So if you've heard them before and you don't want to listen, I don't know, file your nails, go get up and get another adult beverage and wait for the next one. But if you haven't, check them out. There's some pretty good legends, and you can always go to Google and do a little bit of research on these bad boys yourself. So first up, we're starting out with the rake. Not a garden tool, not a hoe. Yeah, no, it's a beastie. It's a creepy critter, y'all. Well, apparently there's some folks out there that actually know a little bit about him, besides me and some of you folks that are listening, because I know y'all are all up on your urban legends. So check this out. In New York during the summer of 2003, see, it's not that long ago, stories about this weird human-like creature starts making their way around on the press and on the internet, and then suddenly everything just goes hush. Everybody's talking about it. Everywhere you look, and all of a sudden, nothing, crickets, right? All these online postings and the reports that were coming out just suddenly disappeared, and now nobody's talking about this creepy-looking little dude. Well, several witnesses, mostly in New York, but somewhere in Idaho, had told their stories to the press, and they posted their stories and their experiences online in a lot of chat groups, not unlike Hardcore Paranormal. Hi, guys. Glad to always have you guys supporting me. Thank you so much. All of a sudden, all that stuff starts disappearing. These folks are dumbfounded because they can't find their interviews and they can't find their personal posts, and this just happens overnight. So in protest, all these folks that had seen this creature started banding together, and they started their own investigation. Well, by early 2006, these guys had discovered documents that dated back to the 12th century. And the dated stories were very similar to their own experiences. Most of them all ended abruptly, leaving them with no more information than what they'd already started with. It was very frustrating. Now, one of the documents that they discovered was a suicide note from 1964. In this note, the victim explained that he had been plagued by this creature and he could no longer bear the horrors that it was bringing upon him. This rake was haunting this dude day and night, and the poor bastard was so terrified that he felt his only means of escaping this creature was to end his own life. Tragic, right? Well, there's a similar note that they discovered that was dated back to 1880. This particular victim had looked into the eyes of the rake and had been tormented by him ever since. It's also believed that this dude took his own life as well. And this one, it's really interesting too. It's an excerpt from a ship's log that dated back to 1691. It seems that the captain was woke up one night just after having made landfall. So he begrudgingly opens his eyes and he finds out that he wasn't alone. Yeah, you guessed it. At the foot of his bed, this horrific creature just stood there, eyeing him up and down. Well, in his notes, the captain stated that it took everything from him, and he was left with the knowledge that they should never return to where they were. That was the last entry made in the journal before the captain and his entire crew disappeared. Now, I know those examples are kind of old as hell, but guess what? Now I'm getting to the good stuff. This is a statement from 2003 made by a wife and mother of a family that experienced an encounter with the rake as well. Now, she says that one evening the family had just got home from a trip to Niagara Falls, and they were all exhausted. So she sees the kids off to bed, and then she and her old man also turn in for the night. Well, at about 4 a.m., she gets woken up by what she thought was her husband going to the bathroom. So she reaches over to steal the covers from his side of the bed, and she discovers that he's still right there next to her. So she apologizes for taking the covers and waking him up. Well, when he rolls over to face her, he suddenly jerks his feet from the end of the bed, and he grabs onto her, but he doesn't say anything. He's just holding her tight. So she looks down towards the foot of the bed, and she sees the same thing that her old man was looking at. Now, she describes this disfigured, naked man that resembled a hairless dog. She said its body was twisted as if it had been hit by a car or something. Now, this creature just continued to stand there at the foot of the bed, staring directly at him. And then suddenly, in an awkward flurry of motion, it made its way along the side of the bed, and now he's standing there face to face with her husband. So the rake stood there staring at him for a few seconds, then reached up and touched his knee before he ran out into the hallway, heading for the kids' room. So they jump out of bed, they go hauling ass behind it to go take care of their kids. Well, when they make it to the hallway, the wife turns on the lights and they see this creature crouching about 20 feet away, and it was covered in blood. The creature then bolts down the stairs, and the parents both run into the kids' bedroom, and they find the daughter badly injured. She was covered in blood, just like the rake was. The child spoke only once. She said, "He is the rake." So they bundle her up and they throw her into the car, and the wife says, "Well, I'm going to stay here and look after the boy and file a police report, and after I get all that taken care of, I'll join y'all at the hospital. Go ahead and get her there now." So her husband, while rushing the girl to the hospital, unexplainably drives his car into the lake that night. Neither he or the little girl survived that accident. So, being in a fairly small town, news of this terrifying encounter traveled quickly, and the police were there, and at first they were really helpful. Then the local newspaper and the local TV station, they're falling all over themselves to get the story, and then all of a sudden, it stopped. The story was never printed, and the TV station never followed up with the lady either. So several months go by, and the wife and her son had been staying at a hotel near her mother. And when she finally decides that they're ready to go back home, she starts some more investigating on her own. So she located a handful of folks that have had similar encounters as her, and guess what? Their stories all fell dead all of a sudden without any explanation, just the same way hers did. But the troublesome similarity was that the ones that survived their encounter with the rake would generally find that it would be the first of many encounters. And those that were touched by the rake, they all wound up dying very violent deaths shortly thereafter. So after having made that discovery, the woman puts a digital recorder next to her bed every night, and every morning she sits there and scans through these recordings, but she finds nothing out of the ordinary, at least up until the first day of the third week. So she goes and starts replaying this recording, and she hears this unnatural and shrill voice. As a matter of fact, it was so shrill that it was impossible for her to listen to it all, not even long enough to try to transcribe what the voice was saying. Now, she remembers hearing nothing the night that her husband and daughter died. However, after she heard that shrill pitch of this inhuman voice, she was somehow made aware that the rake had indeed spoken to her husband, and obviously to her daughter as well. Now, she hasn't seen the rake since that night they died, but she now knows for a fact that he has returned while she's sleeping. Every single night she falls asleep, she's terrified that she's going to wake up and find that creature there in front of her. Well, since these folks banded together and started publicizing their encounters, more and more people are joining in with their stories, and some have even provided some photographic evidence that the beast does, in fact, exist. So there's urban legend number 1 for you tonight. Hope y'all enjoyed that. Jerry Robb, nice to see you, my boy. Karen Butler, Leanne, Sarah, thank you guys for joining in. I'm telling you, guys, if y'all are single and looking for hot women, they're all right here on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen stream. Got all my divas joining in this evening. It's always so nice to see and hear from you guys. Stacy's and everybody's saying hi to each other. I love it when the creepy kids play together. It's so awesome. Y'all are a wonderful group of people. So next up, we're going to talk about another creepy critter. This is the one that I'm hoping to see on a new t-shirt sometime soon. Um, so Claudia from Rod Inc. wanted to know a little bit more about the Grunch. I talk about the Grunch fairly often because they're not a common urban legend. It's not something that everybody's heard of. So a lot of times when I go out of town and do these panels at horror cons or whatever, the Grunch tend to come up because it's not something that a lot of people know about. But when you start doing the Google search, you actually run across a little bit of something. So anyway, like I said, hopefully we'll have a new Raw Ink t-shirt in the works soon. Not as if Miss Claudia likes the story. So a long time ago, when the eastern suburbs of New Orleans were just starting to develop, there was this push to kind of clean up the area. Apparently, that was the area that was like no man's land or the ghettos or whatever. There just seemed to be this overabundance of people that didn't really fit in with typical society. These folks were like dwarfs and albinos and, folks that had some kind of unsightly deformities. Yeah, they had all been forced to live far off the beaten path and out of the public's eye at the end of what they called Grunch Road. So, Grunch Road, imagine this narrow, tree canopied road that kind of just dwindles down to a beaten dirt path that ends in a thicket of water oaks and cypress trees. And within those woods was this functional society that was very different to the socialites of New Orleans. It was quite unique within itself and consisting of all the oddities found within the entire human race. And considering that human race is way down here in the south, yeah. Anyway, imagine further that generations of interbreeding that happened among them. Yeah, the results were pretty monstrous. Their forefathers were feared by the locals. And as a matter of fact, the legend was back in the day that the folks that lived at the end of Grunch Road were a creation of Satan himself. They were trying to figure out how Satan had managed to procreate with all these dysfunctional human-type beings. And, of course, gave a new meaning to the phrase, Daddy's little monster, running around out there in those woods. Anyway, years of mixing these mutations and defects had resulted in offspring that just really didn't even resemble a human anymore. So legend states that this little community of misfit creatures had nearly been forgotten, just faded away into the past like an old wives' tale, at least until folks started coming up missing. Yeah, rumors started circulating, and all of a sudden folks are flocking into the area to catch a glimpse of these freakish beings. Well, besides the daredevils and the thrill seekers, there were those that thought the legends were absolute bullshit. Well, a lot of those doubters trampled their way into the woods there to prove everybody wrong, and a lot of those doubters never came back out of those woods. Now, there weren't a whole lot of folks that encountered the Grunge that actually lived to talk about it, but there were a few. Now, today, locals are still staying clear of that area because there's some crazy stuff that goes down in those woods there. And since those legends have died off, food, of course, has become quite scarce. So these creatures are actually a little bit smarter than they look. And desperation will definitely fuel you when you're hungry. Well, when they got where they were looking too hard for prey and necessity had taken over their bellies, the Grunch got together and they devised a scheme. So what they would do is they would take these injured creatures like dogs or cat and they would stage them on the side of the main drag there to kind of bait folks that were driving by. So these poor kind-hearted bastards would park their car on the shoulder of the road and they'd get out and they'd try to go help this injured animal. Well, by the time they reached the bait, the Grunch would have them surrounded. Both the bait and the Good Samaritan would be dragged into the woods, and then the buffet was open, right? Well, reports of this kind of stuff going on there were pretty frequent up into the late 80s. And at that point, there was this massive development that was going on in the area. It's thought that the population spread out into that neck of the woods just kind of forced the grunch even further and further into the swamplands. So there hadn't been a whole lot heard or seen of them hanging around there since then, but on occasion you do see an abandoned car found right there along that stretch of highway with no explanation or no sign that the owner just kind of walked away from it. So just keep that in mind if you're driving through New Orleans East late at night and you see a cat or dog flopping around on the side of the road, pedal it. Don't stop. Don't even look back, or you may just find out firsthand that the grunch are still alive and well. So hopefully we'll see some grunch t-shirts in the works here sometime soon. That would be freaking awesome. All right, so one more urban legend, and then we're going to change the topic. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. Partaking in my naked wines. You know, I complained for years that they didn't make wine glasses big enough, and my Aunt Wanda and Uncle DW bought me these beautiful monogrammed extra large wine glasses. And they're perfect. They hold just the right amount, but something happens when I come upstairs and I don't know, just my glass seems to empty really quickly. I think it's got something to do with these LED lights over my head just evaporating the wine because it's not me, right? Teresa said, I'll definitely remember that in my next trip to New Orleans. Yes, don't stop. Keep going. Call the SPCA. Give them a mile marker, my girl. All right, so one more urban legend, like I said. And, yeah, that's those creepy little kids. Honestly, creepy little kids. They were called the melon heads. Yes, y'all have all heard about the melon heads. But have you ever heard of how that legend originated? Pretty cool little backstory here, and a lot of truth to it as well. So every town, of course, has its secrets, and some of them go way back into local history. And with every urban legend, there is always truth in its basis. Well, in Cleveland, Ohio, and that surrounding area, there's an extremely creepy, sadly dark, and terrifying story about some creatures known as the melon heads. Has to be the LED lights. That's right. See? Teresa's agreeing with me. That's exactly what it is. Stacy, too. She says that's absolutely right. Karen, my beautiful twisted sister. Yeah, she's definitely agreeing with me, too. She's got her Moscato going on. You go, my girl. I was drinking Moscato last night. It's time for red, though. I like to swap it up. Keep those taste buds guessing. All right, so the original legend goes back to the World War II era when there was all kinds of crazy and sadistic experiments that were going on in the name of science and defense of our God-graced country, right? Well, deep within this rural wooded area just outside of Kirtland, there was this big log cabin, and it came fully equipped with this mad scientist or doctor, depending on which version of the legend you hear. And guess what's going on in there? Yeah, he's performing some gruesome and excruciatingly painful experiments on a bunch of orphans that he'd somehow come into possession of. Some folks in that area say that they were provided by our own government. Now, how the government may have got their hands on these kids is anybody's guess, but it's been said that the wards of the state sometimes just disappeared from this one particular local mental health hospital. Go figure. Glenn said we posted something about the melon heads recently. By the way, I'm having a nice little... Oh, he's drinking some wine too. That's my boy. Glenn is my paranormal brother. Anyway, this twisted doctor's injecting the heads of these poor anonymous kids with these various fluids, bringing them to this hideous state where they look like somebody that suffered with this disease called hydrocephalus. Well, that's actually when fluid builds up inside your skull, which leads to brain swelling. That's always a fun thing to start your day off with, right? Anyway, one of the side effects is that the brain starts to malfunction due to all the pressure that's built up around the skull. That, folks, leads to some pretty serious mental instability, along with deformed heads. So these innocent kids started developing these huge, hairless, vein webbed heads, all while in the process of losing their sanity. Well, after years of horrid treatment, including these sadistic and worsening experiments, these kids were kept in cages in a basement. And what were the experiments for? Who knows? History's filled with these dark projects that were committed by the government for various reasons that we, the public, were never meant to know about, right? And that shit's still ongoing today. Absolutely. COVID. As a result of their continued abuse, the children grew tragically deformed and misshapen. Their bodies stayed short and childlike, and their heads just kept growing. Their personalities grew dim and menacing. The only thing that kept these horrible and unfortunate children from busting out of their cages and going on some kind of madden rampage was the doctor's wife, who did show some level of compassion to these sad little wrecks. But when she died, the melon heads went ape shit. Teresa said there was something on the news about this today, but I didn't listen. That's all right. You're getting the good side of the story right here. Stacy said I read something about them and albino farms. I've heard something about albino farms, but I haven't checked in on it. So the grotesque and barely human mob of freaks escaped from the basement. They destroyed the entire laboratory, smashed all the equipment, ridding the world of all the good doctors' work. Then they located the source of their anguish. Yeah, that evil bastard was ripped to shreds. The melonhead set fire to the building and escaped out into the shadowy darkness of the deep woods, while the house of horrors that they called home burned to the ground. The legend's been passed down that their descendants still live deep in that forest out by Wisner Road, which goes through a really desolate, remote stretch of land just outside of Kirtland. Now, occasionally, a melonhead will still wander out of the woods there towards civilization, where it's spotted by folks along the side of the road, but only for a brief glimpse before it scampers back into the underbrush to stay out of sight. Now, to this day, locals still dare each other to drive out on Wisner Road in the wee hours to see if they can catch a glimpse of one of these hideous offspring. Many swear that they have seen them staring out of the underbrush on the side of the road, these huge eyes just glaring out of a mixture of fear and curiosity, and maybe even a little bit of vicious hatred. Some have even sworn up and down that they've been chased, followed, and attacked by these small, large-headed beings while out in the woods. There's all kinds of versions to the story depending on who you ask in Kirtland and the surrounding areas there. And there's the old-timers who say that the actual melonheads that are seen out of the corner of your eye as a person drives down this pitch-black road at night are the ghost of the original melonheads haunting the area where they knew so much torment and torture at the hands of this sadistic and cruel doctor. And that would make a whole lot of sense, because these were human beings and they were tormented and tortured. And of course, that's a perfect mixture for a haunted area, right? Yeah, definitely. Oh, Gavin made it in. I meant to mention, everybody send some positive vibes to Gavin. I didn't think we were going to get to see him tonight. He was waiting for news from his uncle on his parents. I hope everything is going great. We're glad to have you. Show's not the same without our boy Gavin. He is quite well versed in his urban legend and haunted history. So while we're chilling in the woods, because that's where all the creepy shit happens, right? Let's talk about the Natchez Trace. A lot of you folks may be familiar with the Natchez Trace. It's a very beautiful piece of road. One lane on each side of the road, 55 miles an hour. It's quite hellish when you drive like me. It's like being beat with a stick. I can't drive 55. Yeah. So anyway, we're going to start out with this one spot in particular called Witch Dance. As you're driving down Natchez Trace, there are the brown signs. You know, there's the landmarks where things happened and things were. And There are just tons of them up and down Natchez Trace. It's very historical. It was used a whole lot during the Civil War. So all kind of crazy stuff going on there. So you haven't heard anything back yet, Gavin? Well, let us know if you do. The original folks that were said to have settled that area came from what they called the Hopewell culture. And that originated somewhere between 200 BC and 500 AD. So yeah, definitely original settlers there. So their ancestors wound up joining the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribes later on. But listen to the story how they came to actually be there. This is pretty crazy. So these folks fled to Mexico on foot. But before they did, they dug up all the bones of their relatives and followed their chief every step of the way. Yeah, their leader was armed with this walking staff and a sacred bag and a white dog. And every night he'd stab his staff into the ground, and while they slept, it would rotate. And in the morning when they got up, they would see which way to turn, and of course that would tell them which direction they would set off in order to find their new home. Well, one night, the staff hadn't moved, so of course they had found their new home. And now that they're in their new home, they decided they would rebury the bones of their ancestors that they had drug across the continent with them. So that is what is now known as the Bynum Mounds. Yes, you will see a sign for that along the Natchez Trace. Well, their little community flourished, and it got to the point where the land couldn't really support all of them. So there were these two brothers that were part of the tribe or clan, whichever way you want to look at it. And one of them took half the people and went north. The other stayed put. Those that stayed eventually became known as the Choctaw. Now, because of all the rituals and history in the area, once the Choctaws left, it became a very popular spot for the area witches to gather for their own little ceremonies and rituals. These witches believed that their powers were magnified in this particular spot. Local legend says that when they danced around their fire, they would rise from the ground and their feet wouldn't touch back down. They actually, once they levitated during the whole ritual, but when their feet did come back down and touch the soil, it scorched it. And everywhere their feet touched the soil, nothing would ever grow again on that spot. Now, the area became so notorious that locals and visitors did their very best to avoid it day or night. Even Andrew Jackson wrote something about it in his notes during the 1812 war, so that'll tell you something right there. Now, not everybody was smart enough to stay the hell away from witch dance. If you've been watching the show for a while, these guys are probably going to ring a bell with you. And we're going to talk about them a little bit later as well. The sadistic Harp brothers. Yeah, these are the thugs that made a living robbing and kidnapping and murdering and dismembering their victims up and down the Natchez Trace back in the day. As a matter of fact, they were called the first serial killers in the Americas. So, yeah, that'll tell you something right there. Well, Big Harp, who was known for murdering Major John Love for snoring too loud, and for smashing an infant upside a brick wall for crying, along with a plethora of other evil deeds. He was one of those dumbasses. One day his Indian guide was taking him through the area, and the dude was telling Harp about all the haunting legends there, and he was warning him to stay away from that one spot in particular. Well, that was like hitting the go button with Big Bad Harp. So he goes to the witch dance, and he starts jumping on all the bare spots on the ground, daring these witches to come out and get him. Well, of course, nothing happened. At least, not right then, but perhaps the witches handled their business anyway. Because it wasn't long after that when a pissed off husband and his posse finally tracks him down and kills him for kidnapping, raping, and murdering this dude's wife. Trust me, everybody and their grandmama had been after the Harp brothers. So you think it may have just been a coincidence that he got caught right after teasing the witches? Probably not. So the husband has Big Harp's head cut off and he nails it to a tree alongside the Natchez Trace. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later too. Local legend has it that one of those witches that he pissed off came along later and took his head. It's said that she ground down his skull and used it in one of her potions, thus damning Big Harp to haunt the Natchez Trace for all time. And from the research that I've done on Natchez Trace, I can pretty much verify that that spell pretty much worked because Big Harp is still making frequent appearances in the area today. Now, these days you can still stop off at Witch Dance, and the naked scorched spots on the ground, yeah, they are still there. The spots have been tested countless times, and there's no scientific explanation why nothing will grow there, not even a weed. And in the woods in Mississippi, you can't get a weed to grow, something wrong. Now, there's another haunted spot along the trace called King's Tavern, and I've been threatening to go there for years. We've done a lot of cons in northern Mississippi and been close to this place, but I've never got a chance to stop yet. It's always running like crazy when you're doing a cons, and it's usually in October, so that means it's definitely insane because everybody wants your friendly neighborhood creepy chick at their con in October. So that would be freaking awesome if I had some this year, but no, COVID's pretty much taken care of that. I may just have to stay home and torment the trick-or-treaters. I'm good with that too. So yeah, King's Tavern. It's actually a 230-year-old plus structure that's still in use today. Now you can go there and check it out. It's at 619 Jefferson Street in Natchez. At the moment, it's a very upscale bar and grill, kind of like what it was back in the late 1700s, except for the upscale part. Stacy says she wants to go too. So originally, King's Inn was intended to be a blockhouse for Fort Panmure, but because there was no local sawmill, materials had to come in from other places. Well, many of these structures built here during this era were constructed from the beams of scrapped old New Orleans sailing ships, which had been bought up the Natchez via mule. Another high demand source for materials back in the day were these barge boats and flat river boats that were used to travel down the Mississippi. Well, since the boats couldn't make their way back up the river, when they got there in Natchez, they were dismantled and sold off the Natchez port. So the materials were pretty much easy to come by as long as you went to the port and picked up wood. Now, the other things that were needed, of course, were there locally, which were sun-dried bricks and, stuff like that was common in the area. So after the Revolutionary War, the fort was no longer occupied, and in 1789, this New York dude came in named Richard King, and he moved his family to Natchez, and he purchased this block home, and he turns it into a combination tavern and inn where mail parcels could be picked up and delivered. So as you can imagine, King's Inn was like the happening place. It turned into Natchez's social gathering spot, and King, of course, found his business had become quite lucrative really quick, fast, in a hurry. So during this time, some rather unsavory characters were coming into town, and these weren't the run-of-the-mill outlaws. These were folks like the infamous Hart brothers. These were the sadistic bastards that were bad news. Their favorite pastime was tormenting and mutilating their victims before finally putting them out of their misery. Like we talked about, they made their living off of robbing folks when they left Natchez, mainly the sailors who had just dismantled their vessels and sold the material for building material. So when their pockets were full of stolen cash, they'd return to Natchez and spend all their loot in town, usually at the King's Inn. So let me tell you guys a little bit more about these degenerates and their gang. These two dudes and their cohorts were labeled the first serial killers in the U.S. So when the Revolutionary War began, these two joined up with the Tory rape gang. Not that they supported the royal crown, it was just like justification for them to be going out and brutalizing and murdering and raping and plundering and burning down family homes and farms. Oh yeah, and kidnapping too. Can't forget the kidnapping thing, right? So yeah, these two kidnapped their wives, if you want to call them that. These two young girls endured being beaten and raped on a regular basis, and both of them eventually got pregnant at some point, and of course both of the infants were murdered by the brothers the moment they were born. Real sweethearts, right? So these two wives wind up dead or missing while the brothers and their gang continue on with their reign of terror. Well, later on, one of the brothers took a new wife, and the other, he takes two new wives. The circumstances were a little bit different this time because the new wifeys, yeah, they were pretty vicious on their own. They actually were later tried for murder, but soft hearts back in the day set those tramps free. Well, meanwhile, behind them all, they're leaving this trail of bodies. To be specific, bodies that had been slit open and their guts removed, and the empty cavities were refilled with rocks and dirt. Then the corpses were just thrown into the water and submerged, whatever the nearest body of water was. That seemed to be the gang's calling card. So, like we said earlier, in 1799, this still pissed off father of one of the first kidnapped wives has tracked these brothers down. Now, let me give you a little bit more detail on this. So, the Harps were actually just getting ready to kill a dude when they were spotted by dear old dad. Big Heart was shot down from his horse, but it didn't kill him. That came later, of course, we already know, when dear old dad slowly removed his head with a saw. So the other brother managed to escape, but only for a little while. This dude hooks up with a band of pirates along the river, and he and a friend of his decides they're going to take out the leader of this motley crew because there's a bounty on his head. So they attack the leader and they cut off his head and they take his head to the authorities and go to claim the reward. But when they get there, they were both recognized. So they wound up being executed in 1804 as a result of their flawless scheme. Their heads were actually impaled as well on that same roadway right alongside Big Heart. Gotta love that. Hey, John, good to see you, sweetheart. Hey, you're late, but you're here. That's all that counts. You can always rewind and watch it later. Hey, Sandra, good to see you, sweetheart. Everybody's saying hi. That's awesome. Okay, so back to King's Inn. So things are really rough around this area, and they had been for a long time. And it stayed that way until Big Heart actually lost his head, and with that came the end of two eras in Natchez. The bad guys pulled out, and the steamboats pulled in. Now, there's no longer really a need to travel the Natchez Trace, and as a result of that, yeah, the economy kind of bit the dust, and King winds up selling his establishment to the Postlethwaite family, who actually reverted the inn into a private residence. And it remained in the family for 150 years. Now, in 1973, the homestead was sold again and has been given back to its namesake, the King's Tavern. So, now you know a little bit about the background, it's time to tell you about the darker side of things. One of the first tragedies that struck King's Inn was caused by the Hart brothers. Yeah, you fix to see why these two twisted bastards were beheaded and impaled. So, the infamous brother known as Big Heart that we talked about earlier, yeah, he was staying at King's Inn one night. He was spending a wad of that stolen cash from a robbery a few days before. Also staying there in one of the attic rooms was this young woman with her newborn baby. She had tried relentlessly to quiet the fussy infant, but to no avail. Finally, Big Heart had had enough of the endless squalling, so he marches up the stairs to the attic room, bursts through the door, snatches the kid from his mother, grabs the baby by its feet, swings it with all of his might into the adjacent brick wall. So, of course, the baby died on impact. Today, both the infant and the mother's crying can be heard on the upper levels of the tavern from time to time. Another tragedy that befell the King's Inn was brought about by adultery and then murder. Well, Richard King was turned into a wealthy man fairly quickly, and with most men, or as most men with money do, of course, he determined that he could have just exactly what the hell he wanted, regardless of what his current wife thought about it. So, King had hired this 16-year-old girl to work as a server in his tavern. The girl at the time was engaged herself. Well, King immediately determined that she was going to be his, and he starts his attempts at seducing her. Well, it finally happened. Young Madeline gave in to his advances, and a sultry Mississippi love affair began. Everything was just wonderful between them, at least until Miss King caught wind of what was going on. So, see, most folks here would think, yeah, it's oh shit time for sure. Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about Southern women. We're smart, we're patient, and we sneaky as hell. So with that being said, I'll continue on with the story. So Madeline all of a sudden comes up missing. No shit, right? Yeah, Mr. King, he's walking around with this big old puss on his face, trying his best to hide his broken heart from his wife, so he didn't have to explain what the hell's going through his head. And on the other hand, Mrs. King is wearing this hint of a sly smile, but she didn't have anything to say about anything at all. Okay, so I told you that to tell you this. In 1930, the house had to have some renovations and some shoring done. While they were repairing the fireplace in the main room of the tavern, 3 mummified bodies were found cemented into the walls of the fireplace, 2 men and a young girl. In another fireplace in another room, a dagger was found. It's been assumed that this was the murder weapon for all 3 of those bodies found in the other fireplace. So, who was in the fireplace with Madeline? Yeah, nobody really knows for sure. But there are rumors that the bodies belonged to men that were either patrons or servants that came into the place and annoyed Mrs. King. Hey Lisa, nice to see you, sweetheart. I'm glad you made it. So now the fireplace is known to become hot as hell. No need for a fire. As a matter of fact, it just kind of heats up on its own, even though it's no longer used as a working fireplace. As far as Madeline, she stays quite busy these days. She appears frequently to both patrons and the staff, and apparently she's got some kind of fetish for walking on freshly mopped floors. Her little footprints are often seen walking across the wet surface, headed toward the one who's holding the mop. She also enjoys knocking jars off of shelves and rocking in rocking chairs, turning on faucets, turning off lights, and she proves to be quite handy when she wants to be, though. Some of the staff says that there's a few doors that are really hard to open and close because of the age of the structure. Well, when Madeline's name is called, the door will open, and when the staff member is finished in that room and leaves, the door will close solidly behind them when they walk out. So thanks, Madeline. That's awesome. The King's Tavern has been investigated many times, and there's tons of photos of shadowy figures, and of course, there are both photos and voice recordings of Madeline. There's another entity that's often seen and photographed here as well. He's a very tall man wearing a black jacket and top hat, and he's described as very sinister, and he always appears to be pissed off. He's got this thing for showing up in pictures when people are posing in front of the fireplace where the bodies were discovered. And he also likes to throw things around, particularly dishes. People say that when they see this tall man, they feel a tightness in their chest and throats. And to this day, no one knows or no one's been able to identify any of the other ghosts that are seen there at King's Tavern other than Madeline. Now, there's a couple other haunted places in Tupelo. One of them, yeah, I know you guys know about. This little small wood frame house. It just happens to be the birthplace of Elvis Presley. Yes, images of the King have been well documented for the past several decades. Look for some of them on YouTube. I guarantee you'll be all shook up. Thank you very much. Another relevant haunted spot is the Lyric Theater. Now, the Lyric was built in about 1912, and at that time it had the largest stage constructed for the arts in the entire state of Mississippi. As with most haunted history, the ghosts attached to the Lyric were brought on by severe trauma and tragedy. In April of 1936, a F5 tornado with winds up to 300 miles an hour tore through the entire city of Tupelo, wiping out a path about 3 city blocks wide with damage and destruction that reached out way further than a few blocks. So it was reported that the force of the storm was so massive that pine needles were documented having been driven through the trunks of trees that were left standing. That's crazy. Now, the Lyric was one of these 2 large buildings that actually survived the twister's wake. And immediately after the last of the debris began to settle, the dead, dying, and injured from the storm were being carried, carted, and dragged into the Lyric. Doctors managed to find their way to this makeshift hospital, and they began efforts of saving as many lives as they could with the tools that were available to them. There's a whole bunch of reports of these guys using popcorn poppers to sterilize their tools. Now, that took some ingenuity on their part, but Anyway, regardless of their efforts, over 350 were lost as a result of that tornado. And many of those folks that breathed their last breath within the walls of the Lyric are still there today. There's reports of sounds of these medical instruments clanking around on trays and tables that echo through the whole building. And those popcorn machines that were used in those impromptu surgeries, yeah, they've got a habit of turning themselves on and heating up. Pretty old machines that are actually still working, or maybe they don't work and they just kind of heat up on their own. But the most well documented ghost there at the Lyric is known as Antoine. And Antoine's got a great sense of humor. He enjoys playing tricks, including playing with the lights and slamming doors. And on days when he's in a rare mood, he'll sometimes make a surprise appearance in tours photographs. But his favorite pastime is hiding keys. So if you decide to tour the theater one day, make sure you keep your keys in your pocket, because if you lay them down somewhere, Antoine's going to hide them from you. And you're going to be stuck like Chuck right there in the Lyric. All right, folks, so that wraps it up for the night. I'm glad you all joined in. I hope y'all enjoyed the show. I hope y'all enjoyed the urban legends and a trip down Natchez Trace, talking about all those haunted places. Yes, we need to go visit those. We need to have a Twisted Southern Horror Queen road trip. Wouldn't that be awesome if we could just get all you guys in a big bus and start touring? That would be crazy. All right, folks. Thank y'all for tuning in. I do request, if there's someone that you would like to hear about in an upcoming show, shoot me a message right here on Facebook at Southern Horror Queen. I'd be happy to dig into it if I haven't already done so in the past. Hope you guys have a wonderful week. Don't forget to check out authorlyngibson.com, where you can find my books and all kinds of other creepy stuff, as well as my fantastic sponsors. Make sure you put those discount codes to good use, because that's what they're there for. All right, folks, y'all have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here next Tuesday night at 7 Central and 8 Eastern Time.